Hey, you, why are you sitting here?
I'm waiting for my wife. She's inside shopping.
I'm Officer Reynolds. Let me see some ID.
Is there a problem?
I'm just waiting. You're parked in a handicap spot, Mr.
Walker. James Walker. I'm disabled. Veteran.
Hey you, why are you just sitting here? I'm waiting for my wife, officer. She's inside shopping. I'm Officer Reynolds. Let me see some ID. Is there a problem, Officer Reynolds? I'm just waiting. The problem is you're taking up a handicap spot, Mr. Walker, James Walker. I am disabled. I'm a veteran. See my plates. Yeah, I see 'em, Walker. Lot of people abuse those. Stand up. I can't stand up, sir. Sure you can't. Stand up and prove you need that chair, or I'm writing you up for fraud. Officer Marcus Reynolds had no idea what he just walked into. In the next 52 years behind bars, Reynolds would replay this moment over and over. The 8 seconds it took to grab James Walker's wheelchair, the 12 bystanders who pulled out their phones, and the $6.8 million mistake of doubting a man who'd already sacrificed more for his country than Reynolds ever would. The man in the parking lot wasn't faking anything. He was James Walker. A decorated Afghanistan war veteran with a Purple Heart who lost both legs below the knee to an IED explosion, and a retired FBI agent with 20 years of federal service. Walker knew every civil rights law Reynolds was violating. He understood excessive force protocols better than most police captains. He'd testified in federal court dozens of times. He'd investigated cases just like this one from the other side of the badge. But instead of reciting his credentials, Walker stayed calm. He stated his rights in plain language, and he let Reynolds dig his own grave one ignorant word at a time. And the body camera strapped to Reynolds' chest was capturing every second, every dismissive comment, every illegal demand. And the moment he yanked a paralyzed veteran from his wheelchair and dumped him onto the concrete. James Walker grew up in Chicago. He enlisted in the Army at 22 years old. He wanted to serve his country. He wanted to make a difference. Walker deployed to Afghanistan in 2003. He served 2 tours. He was a combat medic. He saved lives under fire. His unit trusted him. His commanders respected him. On his second tour, Walker's conv hit an improvised explosive device. The blast was massive. Walker woke up in a field hospital in Germany. Both of his legs were gone below the knee. He was 28 years old. The doctors told him he'd need prosthetics for the rest of his life. The Army awarded him a Purple Heart for his wounds. They gave him a medical discharge with full honors. But Walker wasn't done serving. He spent a year in rehabilitation. He learned to walk on prosthetic legs. He learned to drive with hand controls. He applied to the FBI. They accepted him. Walker spent the next 20 years as a federal agent. He worked civil rights cases. He investigated police misconduct. He testified in federal trials. He knew the law inside and out. Walker retired from the FBI at 45. He moved to Denver with his wife Monica. They bought a house near the mountains. Walker stayed active in veteran communities. He mentored younger disabled vets. He volunteered at VA hospitals. He lived a quiet life. He never talked about his service unless asked. He never used his FBI background to impress anyone. On the outside, Walker looked like any other man in a wheelchair. People saw the chair. They didn't see the medals. They didn't see the badge. They didn't see the man who'd given his legs for his country and spent 2 decades enforcing federal law. And that's exactly what Officer Marcus Reynolds saw that afternoon. Just a man in a wheelchair taking up space. Which do you think matters more, what someone looks like or what they've actually done? Marcus Reynolds joined the Denver Police Department at 24. He went through the academy. He passed his field training. He got his badge and his gun. Reynolds worked patrol for 8 years. He had a clean record on paper, no major complaints, no disciplinary actions, but his colleagues knew something else. Reynolds had a reputation. He was quick to escalate. He didn't listen well. He made assumptions about people based on how they looked. Other officers noticed it. They just never reported it. Reynolds believed he could spot a liar. He trusted his gut over evidence. He thought he knew better than the people he stopped. Reynolds had stopped dozens of people in handicapped spots over the years. Sometimes he was right. Sometimes people were using someone else's placard. but Reynolds started to see fraud everywhere. He convinced himself that most disabled people were faking. He'd make comments in the patrol room. He'd say things like, "Half these handicapped people can walk just fine." His training officer had warned him years earlier, "Stop assuming, listen to people, verify before you act." Reynolds nodded, but he never really changed. He believed his instincts were better than policy. He believed he could tell who was lying just by looking at them. On the day he approached James Walker, Reynolds had already written 2 parking citations that week. He was lucky. NG for another one. He saw a man sitting in a wheelchair in a handicapped spot. He saw a disabled veteran plate. And instead of moving on, Reynolds decided this was another scammer, another faker, another person abusing the system. Reynolds walked up to that wheelchair with his mind already made up. He wasn't there to ask questions. He was there to catch someone in a lie. And that certainty, that refusal to listen, that assumption that he knew better than the man in front of him, that's what destroyed his life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Denver. The weather was clear. The grocery store parking lot was busy. Families loading cars, people pushing carts. A normal day. James Walker sat in his wheelchair near the entrance. He was parked in a designated handicap spot. His vehicle had the proper disabled veteran license plate. Everything was legal. Everything was correct. Walker was waiting for his wife Monica. She'd gone inside to grab a few items. Walker stayed outside. He liked the fresh air. He was checking his phone, minding his own business, not bothering anyone. Officer Marcus Reynolds was on patrol nearby. He drove through the parking lot. He was doing a routine pass. He saw Walker sitting there. Reynolds slowed down. He stared. He circled back around. He pulled his patrol car up next to Walker's vehicle. He got out. Reynolds approached Walker with his body camera recording. Standard procedure. Every interaction captured. Reynolds looked at the wheelchair. He looked at the disabled plate. And then he made his first mistake. He assumed Walker didn't belong there. Walker noticed the officer walking toward him. He stayed calm. He'd dealt with police before. He knew how to handle himself. He had nothing to hide. He was sitting in a legal spot with legal documentation. Walker figured this would be a quick conversation. Maybe the officer was checking on him. Maybe he'd ask if everything was okay. Walker had no idea what was about to happen. The parking lot had other people nearby. A woman was loading groceries into her trunk 3 spaces away. A man was returning a shopping cart. A teenage employee was collecting carts near the entrance. None of them were paying attention yet. They were just going about their day. But in a few minutes, all of them would have their phones out. All of them would be recording. And all of them would become witnesses to something they'd never forget. Reynolds stood in front of Walker's wheelchair. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself politely. He just stared down and said, "Hey, you, why are you just sitting here?" Walker kept his voice calm. "I'm waiting for my wife, officer. She's inside shopping." Reynolds wasn't satisfied. I'm Officer Reynolds. Let me see some ID." Walker stayed polite. "Is there a problem, Officer Reynolds? I'm just waiting." Reynolds pointed at the handicap spot. "The problem is you're taking up a handicap spot, mister." "Walker, James Walker, I am disabled. I'm a veteran, see my plates." Reynolds circled around the wheelchair. He looked at the plates. He saw the disabled veteran designation, and then he said the words that would haunt him. "Yeah, I see 'em, Walker. Lot of people abuse those. Stand up." Walker's tone didn't change. I can't stand up, sir." Reynolds crossed his arms. "Sure you can't. Stand up and prove you need that chair, or I'm writing you up for fraud." Walker pulled out his VA identification card. He held it up. He explained slowly and clearly. He told Reynolds he was a veteran. He told him he lost his legs in Afghanistan. He showed the card with his disability rating printed right on it. Reynolds glanced at it, then he waved it away. "I've seen people fake injuries before," Reynolds said. "Those prosthetics are expensive. You're probably scamming the system." Walker asked for a supervisor. Reynolds refused. By now, people in the parking lot were starting to notice. The woman loading groceries stopped. She turned around. She watched. The man with the shopping cart stood still. The teenager by the entrance pulled out his phone. Reynolds leaned closer. His voice got louder. I'm giving you one last chance. Stand up or I'm pulling you out myself. Walker had been in far more dangerous situations than this. He'd been under fire in Afghanistan. He'd handled armed suspects as an FBI agent. He knew how to stay calm under pressure. He kept his hands visible. He kept his voice steady. He repeated the same thing. I am a disabled veteran. I cannot stand. You are assaulting me. But Reynolds had already made up his mind. He wasn't listening. He wasn't thinking. He was acting, and what he did next would cost him everything. Reynolds reached down. He grabbed Walker's left arm. He yanked upward without warning. Walker's body jerked. The wheelchair rocked. Walker kept his voice clear and loud. I am a disabled veteran. I cannot stand. You are assaulting me. Reynolds didn't stop. He used both hands. He pulled harder. The wheelchair star. Ted to tip forward. Walker tried to brace himself, but there was nothing he could do. The chair tipped. Walker fell. He crashed onto the concrete pavement. The impact was hard. His elbow hit first, then his shoulder. His ribs slammed into the ground. His pant leg rode up. The prosthetic limb underneath became visible. The metal and plastic were right there, undeniable, real. The woman in the parking lot screamed, "He really can't walk." Another bystander yelled at Reynolds to stop. Two people were recording on their phones now. The teenager filmed the whole thing. Reynolds froze. For 3 seconds he just stood there, staring down at Walker on the ground, staring at the prosthetic leg he'd just exposed. Reynolds tried to help Walker up. Walker pulled his arm away. Don't touch me, Walker said. His voice was still calm, still controlled, but firmer now. You just assaulted a disabled veteran. Don't touch me again. That 3-second freeze was the moment Reynolds realized he'd made a mistake. He'd just pulled a paralyzed man out of a wheelchair, in front of witnesses, on his own body camera, but he still didn't know who James Walker was. He still didn't know about the FBI career. He still didn't know about the federal training. He thought this was just a bad judgment call. He had no idea this was the end of his life as he knew it. Walker stayed on the ground. He wasn't going to let Reynolds move him. He wasn't going to let this get swept under the rug. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was preserving the scene. He was keeping witnesses engaged. He was making sure everyone saw what had just happened. If you want to see more stories where people stood up for their rights, hit that subscribe button right now. Inside the grocery store, Monica Walker was checking out. She had no idea what was happening outside. She paid for the groceries. She grabbed the bags. She walked toward the exit, and then she heard the shouting. Monica ran through the automatic doors. She saw her husband on the ground. She saw the officer standing over him. She dropped the grocery bags. She sprinted across the parking lot. She fell to her knees beside James. Are you hurt? She asked. What happened? James stayed calm. I'm okay. He pulled me out of my chair. Monica looked up at Reynolds. Her voice was shaking, not from fear, from rage. Do you know who you just assaulted? Reynolds didn't answer. Monica pulled out her phone. She called their attorney first. Then she called James's former FBI supervisor. She put the phone on speaker so Reynolds could hear. When the supervisor answered, Monica said it clearly. Someone just assaulted James, a police officer. He pulled him out of his wheelchair. We need help. The supervisor asked where they were. Monica told him. He said he'd make calls immediately. He told them to stay put. He told them to document everything. 2 backup officers arrived within minutes. Reynolds tried to explain. He said he thought Walker was faking. He said he was just doing his job. The backup officers asked for Walker's name. When they heard it, one of them went pale. James Walker, FBI James Walker. The officer had worked a joint task force with Walker years earlier. He knew exactly who Walker was. He turned to Reynolds. You need to step back right now. The backup officers called for an ambulance. They called for a supervisor. They separated Reynolds from Walker. They started taking statements from witnesses. The woman who'd been loading groceries came over. The man with the cart came over. The teenager showed them his phone. I got the whole thing on video, he said. Lieutenant Patterson arrived. He was the shift supervisor. He took one look at the scene and knew this was bad. He secured Reynolds' body camera immediately. He told Reynolds not to say anything else. He interviewed all 12 bystanders. He collected contact information from everyone who'd recorded video. Patterson knelt down next to Walker. "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Patterson. Can you tell me what happened?" Walker recounted the incident. He used precise language. He stated facts. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't add emotion. He sounded exactly like what he was, a federal agent giving a statement. Patterson wrote everything down. When Walker mentioned his FBI background, Patterson closed his eyes for a second. He knew this was about to become a federal case. Paramedics arrived. They checked Walker for injuries. He had concrete scrapes on his elbow. His shoulder was bruised. His ribs hurt when he breathed. They wanted to take him to the hospital. Walker agreed. Monica followed in their car. Reynolds was sent home for the day pending investigation. He thought he might get a reprimand. He had no idea the FBI was already making calls. Within hours, the videos started spreading. One of the bystanders posted his recording online. He didn't add commentary. He just posted the raw footage. A police officer yanking a man out of a wheelchair. A man who clearly had prosthetic legs. A man who'd been calm the entire time. The video spread fast. People shared it. Local news picked it up. Then regional news. Then national outlets. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The image of Reynolds pulling Walker from his chair became a symbol. A disabled veteran treated like a criminal. A decorated FBI agent disbelieved and assaulted. Veterans groups issued statements. They demanded accountability. Disability rights organizations called for federal charges. The Denver police chief scheduled a press conference. He stood at a podium and read a prepared statement. Officer Reynolds had been suspended without pay. The department was cooperating with a federal investigation. They took this matter seriously. But the public wasn't satisfied with a suspension. They wanted more. Comment sections filled up. People demanded Reynolds be fired. They demanded criminal charges. They wanted to know how this could happen to a war hero. The body camera footage was released through a public records request. That made it even worse for Reynolds. His own camera showed everything. It showed him dismissing Walker's VA card. It showed him refusing to call a supervisor. It showed him grabbing Walker and pulling. It showed the fall. It showed Reynolds freezing when he saw the prosthetic leg. The footage was undeniable. It wasn't edited. It wasn't taken out of context. It was exactly what it looked like. An officer assaulting a disabled veteran who told him repeatedly that he couldn't stand. What do you think should happen to officers who ignore clear evidence? Drop your answer in the comments. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation immediately. Walker's former supervisor made sure of it. This wasn't just a local police matter anymore. This was a federal case. The FBI reviewed the body camera footage. They reviewed the witness videos. They interviewed all 12 bystanders. They pulled Walker's medical records with his permission. The medical records were clear. Walker had both legs amputated below the knee following an IED explosion in Afghanistan. The injury was permanent. There was no question about his disability. The VA had rated him fully disabled. He'd been receiving benefits for years. He had prosthetic legs custom-made for his specific needs. Federal prosecutors charged Reynolds with 3 crimes: civil rights violation, assault on a disabled person, and battery, all federal charges. Reynolds hired a lawyer through the police union. The lawyer told him to stay quiet, but the evidence was overwhelming. The trial started months later. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They played the body camera footage. They called all 12 witnesses. Every single one told the same story. Reynolds ignored Walker's explanations. He dismissed the VA card. He refused to call a supervisor. And he used physical force on a man who'd clearly stated he was disabled. Walker testified for 2 hours. He described his military service. He talked about losing his legs. He explained his FBI career. Then he described the assault. He talked about the pain of hitting the concrete, the humiliation of being disbelieved despite showing proof, the fear that Reynolds might hurt him worse. Walker's testimony was calm. He didn't raise his voice. He just told the truth. The defense tried to argue that Reynolds made an error in judgment. They said he had no malicious intent. He was just trying to enforce the law. He thought Walker was committing fraud. The prosecution tore that argument apart. Reynolds had visible evidence: the disabled veteran plate, the VA identification card, Walker's clear statements, and Reynolds ignored all of it. Then he used force. That wasn't an error, that was a choice. The jury watched the body camera footage multiple times. They heard from 8 bystanders during the trial. All of them said the same thing: Walker was calm. Reynolds was aggressive. Walker tried to de-escalate. Reynolds refused to listen. The jury deliberated for 1 day, then they came back, guilty on all 3 charges. If this channel covers stories that matter to you, go ahead and hit subscribe. We're going to keep bringing you cases where justice actually happened. The judge scheduled sentencing 3 weeks after the verdict. Walker had the option to give a victim impact statement. He took it. He stood at the podium in the federal courtroom. Monica sat in the front row behind him. Walker didn't read from notes. He spoke directly to the judge. He said he'd served his country for years, first in the military, then in the FBI. He'd taken an oath to protect and serve. He'd lived by that oath. He'd sacrificed for it. He'd lost his legs for it. And on a normal Tuesday afternoon, an officer who'd taken the same oath treated him like a criminal. Not because Walker broke any law, but because Reynolds didn't believe him. Reynolds saw a man in a wheelchair and assumed fraud. He saw a disabled veteran plate and assumed it was stolen. He saw a VA card and assumed it was fake. Walker said he'd dealt with discrimination before. People stared at his wheelchair. People talked down to him. People assumed he couldn't do things, but he'd never had someone physically assault him for being disabled. He'd never been pulled from his chair and thrown to the ground. The judge listened. Then the judge spoke. He said this case represented a betrayal of public trust. Reynolds had power. He had a badge. He had authority. And he used that power to harm someone who'd already sacrificed more than most people ever would. The judge said the sentence needed to reflect the severity of that betrayal. Officer Marcus Reynolds was sentenced to 52 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. The courtroom went silent. Reynolds dropped his head. His lawyer tried to argue the sentence was too harsh. The judge disagreed. He said assaulting a disabled veteran on camera after being told repeatedly that the man couldn't stand warranted every year of that sentence. Reynolds lost his badge that day. He lost his pension. He lost his freedom. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Walker watched him go. Then he left with Monica. They didn't celebrate. They just went home. The city of Denver settled Walker's civil lawsuit for $6.8 million. The settlement came fast. The city knew they had no defense. The evidence was too clear. The jury verdict made it certain they'd lose in civil court too, so they paid. But Walker didn't just take the money and disappear. He used part of the settlement to establish a foundation. The foundation helps disabled veterans navigate legal issues. It connects them with attorneys. It provides resources. It teaches them their rights. Walker wanted to make sure other disabled vets didn't go through what he went through. The Denver Police Department made changes too. They implemented mandatory disability awareness training for every officer. New recruits go through it at the academy. Veteran officers take it as a refresher course. The training uses Walker's case as an example. They watch the body camera footage. They discuss what Reynolds did wrong. They learn how to verify disability claims properly. They learn to listen instead of assume. The body camera footage is now used in police academies across the country. It's become a training video on what not to do. Instructors show it to cadets. They pause it at key moments. They ask what Reynolds should have done differently. The answer is obvious. Believe the evidence in front of you. Verify before you act. Don't let your assumptions override reality. Walker gives speeches now. He talks at police academies. He talks at veteran events. He shares his story, not for sympathy, but to teach. He tells officers that disabilities aren't always visible. He tells them that credentials aren't always obvious. He tells them that assumptions can destroy lives. Monica advocates too. She focuses on invisible disabilities, conditions people can't see just by looking. She pushes for better training, better awareness, better policies. She wants officers to understand that just because someone doesn't look disabled doesn't mean they're faking. Reynolds is serving his sentence at a federal facility. He'll be 91 years old before he's eligible for release. His earliest possible release date is decades away. He'll spend the rest of his productive life behind bars, all because he refused to believe a man in a wheelchair, all because he thought he knew better, all because he let his assumptions guide his actions instead of the evidence right in front of him. Do you think 52 years was the right sentence, or should it have been more, less? Comment your thoughts below. So let me ask you, how many officers are out there right now making the same assumptions Reynolds made? How many disabled people get questioned, harassed, or worse, because someone doesn't believe them? How many veterans who served this country get treated like criminals because their disability isn't obvious enough? Because if we don't demand better training, better accountability, and better awareness, then we are waiting for the next Reynolds, the next Walker, and the next assault that should never have happened. Comment below if you believe mandatory disability training should be required for all police officers nationwide. If stories like this matter to you, hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep exposing these stories. We're going to keep demanding better. This isn't just about one officer or one veteran. It's about all of us. See you in the next one.